Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to break down the escalating crisis in Venezuela by looking at what the source material itself has to say. The big question we're tackling today is this whole situation really what it seems on the surface?
Everything kicked into high gear with this one. Dramatic statement reportedly from President Trump shutting down all of Venezuelan airspace. I mean, just like that, a major international incident was underway, and the stakes in the Caribbean shot up to a level we really haven't seen in decades.
So, what's the official reason we're being given by the White House? Well, the public narrative is that this is all part of a necessary crackdown on Venezuela, a country they've now branded a narco-terrorist state under Nicolas Maduro. And the military response, which they've codenamed Operation Southern Spear, is, well, it's absolutely massive. We're talking more than a dozen warships, B-52s ready to go, thousands of troops. For something that's being framed as an anti-drug operation, the scale here is just staggering.
But this is where it gets really interesting. The analysis we're digging into today, which comes from political scientist John Mearsheimer, makes a pretty bold claim that this whole official story, it's basically fiction.
Okay, so let's actually deconstruct that. Let's dive into the data that the source presents and see for ourselves how well the official story holds up when you really start to scrutinize it. The very first piece of data that really makes you pause is this number right here. According to the source, only about 5% of all the drugs trafficked into the United States even pass through Venezuela. Not most of it, not a lot of it, just 5%.
And this slide just illustrates that disconnect perfectly. Look, the vast majority of cocaine comes up the Pacific coast, but this huge American military force, it's deployed way over in the Caribbean. The solution doesn't seem to be where the problem is.
So you see this huge discrepancy, and it naturally leads you to a pretty fundamental question. If this massive military operation isn't really positioned to stop the main flow of drugs, then what else could possibly be driving this?
The analysis points to a completely different motivation, and it can be summed up with this number, 300 billion. That's the estimated number of barrels of proven oil reserves sitting under Venezuela. It's the largest in the entire world. Yeah, even bigger than Saudi Arabia.
And that's the crucial point, according to this analysis. The military pressure, the airspace closure, it's all a form of high-stakes leverage. It's about using the threat of force to get a better deal, to get access to all that oil.
Okay, let's zoom out a little and look at the bigger picture, because this isn't just a regional issue anymore. It's quickly becoming a global power struggle, and Venezuela is not standing alone here.
As you can see, Venezuela has become a critical piece on the global chessboard. The Maduro regime has some powerful friends, namely Russia and China, and each of them has their own strategic reasons for being there and for pushing back against American influence right on its doorstep.
And the fact that there are Russian military assets there, that's a huge deal historically. According to Mearsheimer, this pretty much marks the end of the Monroe Doctrine, that century-old policy where the U.S. basically told Europe to stay out of the Americas. For the first time in a very long time, a rival great power has a real military foothold in America's backyard.
The source then draws what is a really direct and pretty powerful parallel between what's happening just off the coast of Florida and the war that's been raging in Eastern Europe.
And this is where you see the core contradiction. The U.S. position on Ukraine has been very clear. Russia does not have the right to a sphere of influence. But at the same time, in its own hemisphere, the U.S. is aggressively enforcing that exact same concept, telling Venezuela it's not free to choose its own allies.
And according to the analysis, this apparent double standard isn't just a talking point, it has real consequences. It creates serious friction with key allies in Europe, and it weakens the very solidarity the U.S. needs to deal with Russia and China elsewhere in the world.
So where does this all lead? The source lays out a few potential paths forward, and honestly, none of them look all that great for America's long-term interests.
Mearsheimer gives us 3 scenarios. Best case, a negotiated deal, but he only gives that a 30% chance. The most likely outcome, at 50%, is a messy, frozen conflict that just drags on for years. And then there's the worst-case scenario, a full-blown invasion that turns into another multi-trillion-dollar quagmire, a lot like Iraq or Afghanistan.
The analysis argues this whole crisis isn't just some isolated event. It's actually a symptom of a much bigger and maybe failing American foreign policy strategy, what experts call liberal hegemony. It's this core belief that the U.S. should actively try to remake the world in its own image, using its military to do it if necessary.
And that brings us to the final, really provocative question that the source leaves us with.
By sticking to this grand strategy in a world that isn't so simple anymore, is the United States basically just repeating the same mistakes of overextension that have brought down so many other great powers throughout history? It's a tough question with no easy answer, but it's one that the events in Venezuela are forcing us